Hello and welcome to Health Professional Radio. I'm your host, Neal Howard. Thank you for joining us today. Our guest is a returning guest, and he spent more than 20 years in the treatment of sex and intimacy issues, helping both cheating men and the spouses on whom they cheat. He brings a wealth of information and knowledge and some healing as the author of Out of the Doghouse, a step-by-step relationship-saving guide for men caught cheating. Our guest is Robert Weiss. Welcome to Health Professional Radio, Robert.
Hey, good morning, Neal. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming back. We were here in another segment talking about your work as in helping people mend broken relationships that are broken due to infidelity of varying degrees. You're the author of a book, Out of the Doghouse, a step-by-step relationship-saving guide for men caught cheating. Is this just for men?
This book is for men. Well, let me back up. This is a book for women to read so that they get that, yes, their man will now understand the pain they're in, and yes, he will now understand what he has to do to make it better. And I just use the metaphor of the doghouse because I have little puppies, and when they pee in the house, it means they've dirtied the house, and they've got to go outside, and they don't get their warm, fuzzy bed or their good food, and that's a lesson to them, And so if you are a part of an intimate partnership and you cheat on your spouse and they don't know that that's something you're going to go do, you've kind of dirtied your house. And that means you don't get the same rights and privileges as you had before in terms of love, connection, relationship, and support. And I think men need to understand what it takes to get that back and how long it might be before they get it back.
So basically, we are talking about mending because fidelity isn't necessarily a deal breaker.
It's rarely a deal breaker. Interestingly to me, and as one of the things we talked about in other segments is that my work is really about the most profound forms of infidelity, dealing with sex addiction and compulsive sexual behavior and internet addiction related to porn and all of that. So, I see the worst of the worst, but the pain that the spouses experience doesn't seem to be very different. And, Neal, there's a question that I wanted to ask for you, which is, is porn cheating? Because that's a question I hear a lot, and if I, maybe when I was looking at Playboy once in a while or whatever I was looking at, maybe that was or wasn't cheating, but I'll tell you, we've interviewed hundreds of women, and everyone says that if they did not know that their guy was regularly looking at porn, they just didn't know, and they found it, they felt like he was cheating. And if they knew about it and they'd already discussed it and it was like, oh yeah, you look at it, then they didn't feel like it was cheating because it had been discussed. So just a quick note on that is that the betrayal is not around the sex itself. It's really around trust. It's I have betrayed your trust in me, and maybe you can't believe anything I say now because you thought I wasn't doing this and I was.
Back in the day, 20, 30 years ago, maybe 40 years ago, no internet, the sex wasn't as prolific as it is in movies and television as it is now. Do you think that the amount and availability now due to the digital age lends more to the profoundness of the infidelity, at least in the mind?
Well, I think what we're seeing is an escalation in sex addiction and porn addiction and the problems that I started treating before we had an internet. And the reason for that is very simple, and not to mention day-to-day cheating, which is increased exponentially. And the simple reason is there's only a couple of words. One of them is access. Because if you think about it, and I don't know how old you are, I'm not going to ask, Neal, but back in the day, if I wanted to get laid, I had to, put on a cheap shirt and some bad cologne and go down to a bar where I barely knew anybody and hope that if I had a good enough line and my breath was okay at that moment, then maybe I might be able to get someone to go home with me, and maybe we would have an interesting sexual experience, and we might or might not get along. But what do I do now? I simply pick up my Tinder, my Grindr, my Ashley Madison, whatever it is, and within 3.4 seconds, I can find geolocate anyone within 1,000 feet who's looking for sex, and I can just start texting and sexting, and within about an hour, or less, I'll probably find someone to go to my house, or I can go to theirs, and what's done is done. So, and that's not good or bad or right or wrong. It's just that when you have greater access to intensely pleasurable experiences without any kind of limitations, then more people are going to gravitate toward testing it out, and some people are going to get in trouble.
Is sex addiction porn addiction?
That's like, so that's a great question. You asked the question of sex addiction, porn addiction. To me, that's like saying, is a problem with cocaine drug addiction? Because, it doesn't really matter whether it's porn or sex workers or affair after affair after affair, or it's constantly flirting. What sex addicts are after is that constant high and intensity of the chase. And they literally lose themselves in it for days at a time sometimes. In other words, they may be sitting with their spouse at dinner, but they're really looking over her shoulder at that waitress's butt, which may not be unusual, but they're also thinking to themselves, oh, if I get up and I go talk to her and I get her card and we exchange numbers, and I can probably set something up before I even get back to the table and finish dessert, those are the people I work with.
Oh, man. So when you're talking about compulsion, it is truly a compulsion. You can't help yourself. You are truly addicted.
Well, I think, number one, I want to say there's a difference between cheating and addiction. Someone may cheat for a variety of reasons. Addiction is really a deeper psychological underlying issue. But, it doesn't really matter whether it's porn or gambling. When you have a very powerful pleasure, well, let me try it this way. We only have one pleasure center in the brain. In other words, we only have one set of neurons that deliver to us pleasure. We get a little bit of that pleasure when we smell a flower. We get a little bit of that pleasure when we have dinner with friends. We get a bunch more if we smoke a cigarette or do some heroin. And the most dopamine or the most pleasure you can experience as a human without drugs is orgasm. So, yes, while 90% of the folks that I know have no problem seeking out sex for recreation, procreation, or whatever the purposes they want to have it, the people that I work with, the more troubled people I work with, are dealing with sex as a way of emotionally escaping and kind of like very much like drinking.
Oh, so it's very much like drinking. Is the treatment very much like treatment for drugs and alcohol addiction? Is it the same thing?
Well, let me just say two things about that. One is that when people don't understand sex addiction, and I completely understand that they may not, how could sex be an addiction? I would say that, most people don't really understand alcoholism, nor do they have to, because if they drink and they have half a glass of wine and they put it down, or they get drunk at New Year's maybe once in a while, they don't understand why alcohol is a problem for other people, why they can't put it down. But if you're an alcoholic, you can't have that casual drink because you're going to end up, in serious trouble, or you don't even know where you're going to end up. And so in the same way, 90% of the population can have any kind of sex they want that's consensual among adults, and that's up to them, none of my business. But there's a small percentage of the population who, like alcoholics, get hooked on the arousal and the excitement that leads up to sex, and they use that as a way to escape more difficult emotional situations. So yes, they use sex addictively.
In your experience, have you ever worked with a couple, whether straight or gay or whatever, that both of them are addicted to porn, internet porn, or say going online and finding other people to hook up with in certain combinations? Is that something that you've encountered, or is it normally?
Well, I'll tell you what I see more. What I see more often is the man, for example, and it doesn't always have to be a man, but in this, more typically, the man is looking at a lot of porn, and his spouse doesn't feel comfortable with it. She doesn't like it. She doesn't feel good about it. She compares herself to those images, or she feels that she's not good enough, or if he was looking at that, why does he need her? It creates a lot of self-doubt in women often when someone's looking, or a man, if his woman is looking at a lot of porn and it isn't him. It's funny how guys don't think about that. Like, imagine us walking in on one, imagine you working on your spouse, and there she is, or he is, looking at all this porn. You think, well, wait, what about me? Aren't I important? What about, why are you, I don't look like that, all of that. But anyway, let me give you the answer to your question. Treatment, let me just give you a more basic answer than treatment. It's more about how sobriety and healing is defined for a sex addict. Because if you're a compulsive a gambler, or you have a problem with alcohol and drugs, you can stop and never go back. No one says that you have to drink to have a happy life, or you have to gamble to have a happy life. So in some ways, it's very black or white. For those kinds of issues, it's on or off. But when you get to things like eating disorders, compulsive and addictive eating, or compulsive and addictive sexual behavior, then you have naturally occurring functions that you don't want to eliminate. I don't want anybody saying, "Oh, I've really healed my eating disorder. I don't eat anymore." That wouldn't make a lot of sense. So sobriety in naturally occurring functions is much more about setting a baseline for what that person perceives as healthy for them based on their circumstances. Like the gay 24-year-old kid who's single probably had a different sobriety plan than the straight guy who's married and 57. But each is trying to follow some kind of guideline that helps support the life that they want to live without dipping into problem sexual behavior.
Let's talk about your presence on the internet, since we're talking about the digital technology that's promoting huge amounts of porn and whatnot. If we navigate over to your site, robertweissmsw.com, what would we expect to find there?
Well, you'll find a lot of resources for cheating, for infidelity, for sex addiction, for intimacy disorders. There's places where people can find support groups and non-for-profit like 12-step support and books to read. And so I've really tried to make the site as informational as possible so that people, this isn't a question you want to go to your neighbor and say, hey, I'm just curious, what's sex addiction? My husband might have it. You should likely do that. Yeah. But there are places online where you can find that information, and it is real news. And my site is one of those places, so thank you for asking.
Have you ever treated someone on an inpatient basis for sex or porn addiction?
Yeah, actually, the last probably 8 years of my career has been creating treatment environments for people who have sex and intimacy disorders. So I have the only, and I have the privilege of having started the only women's programs in the country that are gender separate completely for women, and I have a men's program that has had a waiting list forever down in Tennessee at a place called The Ranch. And you have to understand, by the time somebody is at residential level, their sexual behavior has gotten, and by the way, it's not that what they're doing, it's not that they're doing anything illegal necessarily, it's just the repetition of their sexual behavior, the cost of their sexual behavior, the exhaustion that it provides. My folks are toast. I mean, they need to kind of clear the boards, talk about everything they've done, set a new template for how they're going to live their lives, and then begin to try to clean up the mess they've made. And sometimes that takes some time.
Now, your new book is Out of the Doghouse, a step-by-step guide for men caught cheating. Where can we get it if it's out?
I think you can find it on any online outlet and most of the larger bookstores. But as I found with most books around sex, I would suggest you simply download it.
Great. It's been a pleasure speaking with you, Robert.
Thanks, Neal. I appreciate your asking me in.
You've been listening to Health Professional Radio. I'm your host, Neal Howard, in studio with Robert Weiss. Transcripts and audio of this program are available at healthprofessionalradio.com.au and also at hpr.fm. And you can subscribe to this podcast on iTunes.